Why are you so stupid? And by you, I mean the player character that is the Vestige in the Elder Scrolls Online. Just like a few of the other protagonists in the Elder Scrolls franchise, the Vestige starts their hero's journey as a prisoner, and spoiler alert by the way for the rest of the video, the Vestige ends a lot of world-ending cataclysms, tackles on powerful dragons while trading blows and jobs with literal gods, reenacts feats of valor that feature in the other games such as Battlespire, and pretty much is one of the most powerful, accomplished, and knowledgeable individuals in the entire Elder Scrolls universe and the history of Tamriel, but is apparently also really dumb judging from your dialogue options. Who's her Mace Mora? Who's King Emmerich? Who's Molag Bal? Who's Suthasil? There's a war happening? What are Daedra? What was a Thracian plague? I feel like a lot of the questions our character asks in ESO literally can be equated to a serf or peasant in medieval times not knowing who their landlords were. Sure, they didn't know or care to know who the lords or nobles were, but at least they knew of them. The Vestige is even worse than an American, not knowing where anything is located on any map, because at least the worst Americans know that the bubonic plague and World War II happened, and that other world leaders, religions, and institutions exist. And at least most decent people would remember the individuals that they fought alongside in conflicts, or, helped one another to save the entirety of the world more than a few times. The Vestige dialogue options when it comes to asking the most pointless questions can be infuriating, especially when you sat there and listened or read everything a few seconds ago, and instead of getting more interesting dialogue options or ways for a player newer to the Elder Scrolls to get even more interested in the lore or the universe of the Elder Scrolls, you just kind of met with a dead end. And if you ask these pointless questions enough, funnily enough, even the writers kind of make fun of you through the characters for not remembering or relentlessly asking them to remind you what's going on 1 minute after you finish the previous quest chain. The Vestige is so dumb that a Reddit user even came up with a lore theory for why the Vestige is so dumb, speculating that's perhaps because they lost their soul, and so they've lost a lot of things associated with the soul, such as memory. And maybe that's why also ESO players keep dying in PvP and PvE the same way as well, repeatedly, because they've lost their souls. But this theory doesn't make sense, because, well, you get your soul back at the end of the main quest line, and you're still dumb or have a severe case of amnesia. A different user on the same thread has also speculated that the Vestige is simply a mortal vessel occupied by a Daedric Vestige that has had no experience whatsoever in the day-to-day knowledge of Tamriel, which would explain why a Khajiit would need to ask what is a Sench, and why an Argonian would need to ask what is a Saxhleel. This theory to me might hold more water for me, but this also doesn't make sense when you're Daedra asking about who Mehrunes Dagon is in the Blackwood chapter, or who the other Daedric princes are, or what Daedra are in general. Or how about the fact that you can now actually skip out on the Cold Harbor quest line on a new character by not getting sacrificed to Molag Bal from your starter town, and still retain these dialogue options when exploring other areas of the game. So, none of it makes sense. The lore in ESO has done quite a bit on expanding the Elder Scrolls universe, much more than basically any other game in the franchise, and while it has had a huge amount of predictability and blandness, especially when it comes to the main chapter quest lines, it still does extremely well with the side quests and the smaller DLC storylines that offer a lot more interesting information, even for people who are not as familiar with Elder Scrolls lore compared to people who hang out on the lore Reddits. However, I don't know if this annoys anyone else, or maybe it's just me, but it seriously breaks my immersion and also makes me question what the heck the writers were thinking when, for example, if you've done all the quests in the Aldmeri Dominion zones, and of course interact with Razum Dar, a huge fan favorite character by the way, later on you meet him in the Somerset chapter and he doesn't remember you, or your adventures together. The same happened with Naryu in the Morrowind chapter, so this leads to us to our ultimate question. Is this lazy writing, or is there something else going on? I feel like if you ask any jaded ESO player that wants to rip on ESO, even more after they've supposedly quit the game for real this time, yes, it's lazy writing. However, I would say, in my opinion, that it's because ESO is a MMO, unlike the other games in the Elder Scrolls franchise, which have much better dialogue options. The MMO aspect matters, whether you like it or not, because a lot of newer gamers and players not as familiar with the Elder Scrolls universe or what may be going on in ESO may need to catch up to speed. That may be hard to believe as Skyrim has enchanted millions of gamers for the past 12 years and going, but Skyrim 2 was also an introductory Elder Scrolls game for the same millions of gamers, just as Oblivion was an introductory Elder Scrolls game for those who hadn't played Morrowind or the older Elder Scrolls games. In some ways, you can think of the Vestige dialogue options as an almost necessary evil of a live service game that's constantly adding stories to the already massive game through DLCs and expansions, while also trying to interconnect the newer stories with the older stories somehow consistently when possible. Hiring or rehiring professional voice actors is also really expensive to upkeep, as ESO is one of the few MMORPGs out there that's fully voiced everywhere, to the point that there are hundreds of thousands of voice lines, over 100 actors, and of course, a big portion of ESO's 90 plus gigabyte size is voice lines. So trying to put it all together in some sort of cohesive blob that tries to cater to both newer and older players with expenses is an angle I think people should rationally consider. Now, obviously, some of you won't give ESO a free pass out there because it's an MMO or because it's voiced, because you'll say, oh, let's look at Star Wars The Old Republic. It's an MMO, has captivating stories with great dialogue options, and has also had fully voiced content. However, in this case, I would question exactly how many more new players nowadays go to ESO compared to Star Wars The Old Republic. The ESO lore master himself, Michael Zink, who came into our podcast, has also stated that a lot is taken into consideration for newer players as well, in addition to the factors I just mentioned. However, I will offer my personal feedback in the public space should the ESO writers want to take it for future consideration. I think there are ways to make the dialogue options feel less patronizing or less off-putting for a lot of players, both new and old. For example, let's look at the question, who is Hermaeus Mora? Rather than this, why not change it to, tell me more about Hermaeus Mora? So that gives older players the option to either actually see perhaps lesser known information about Hermaeus Mora, or revisiting older information in the previous game in a not so amnesiac way, while giving new players the greater context of what or who Hermaeus Mora is. Or let's look at the question, remind me again, what do we need to do? Which pops up quite a lot in numerous quest lines after the NPCs literally tell you what to do, while your quest journal, map pin, compass pin, and quest tracker update for you. This could be changed to, so what will happen after I do X? Or, if you want to really stick to the original question's essence, why not just ask, are you sure about this? For the player to think about the weighted consequences of their actions or surrounding events or what they're about to do as a clarification from the NPC that will state something like, I don't know, or yes, followed by, but, or so for now, just do what I told you to do, and then they repeat the instructions. But obviously, this is all just my opinion, and I feel like the Elder Scrolls Online could do a little bit better in making the interactions between you and many NPCs feel more alive, especially in the newer chapters. At the end of it all, it's just an annoying and minor grip I have with the dialogue aspect of the game as far as my character is concerned, and it throws me off every time such dialogue options pop up. But, if it helps newer players, cool. But I do think that there are ways to make it a bit more engaging as well for the newer players and the older players at the same time. If you guys want to know more about ESO story writing and behind the scenes stuff with ESO story writing, check out the ESOU podcast featuring ESO's lore master from ZeniMax Online Studios, where he answered a lot of our questions.